Right. Molo Sambonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, good folks. Welcome to another episode of Liberty and Friends here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. My name is Cilliers Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. You'll have to forgive me if it sounds like a starry night here with crickets in the background. For some wonderful reason, they must know that I have politicians on the show. That is a jab at my guests who are in the waiting lobby at the moment. Guys, with that being said, and I see your feedback, Felicia, about the sound not being so nice. I will try my level best, guys, to get rid of that cricket at some point in the show. But with that being said, let me just get straight into it. Good evening, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends, your Sunday night evening, or your Sunday evening rather, viewing, where we look at the news week that was. Okay, I'm getting a lot of feedback around the audio being trash. That is not a good sign. Let's see if I can do something. All right, guys, hold that note. Let me see if I can sort something out. I am going to put us on hold for a few seconds and just bear with me, please. All right, I've hopefully bought myself a couple of seconds of no cricket noise so I can do a very quick intro. The noise will be back at some stage, but I'll mute myself on a sort of intermittent basis. Guys, with that being said, let's get straight into it, guys. Good evening, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Again, apologies for the poor sound. There are crickets at the moment, guys. It's Durban, it's spring, summer, they're back. With that being said, I want to get straight into tonight's conversation because I know it's been top of mind for effectively most of the week, as a lot of you have been wondering what the hell is going on in the city of Johannesburg with, of course, the DA-led coalition, or just the coalition in Johannesburg, finding itself effectively losing the city at the hands of the ANC EFF coalition, assisted, of course, by a one wayward, and I'll use the word wayward insofar as clearly the coalition didn't want this, COPE councillor, who, subsequent to being voted in as Speaker of the Johannesburg Council, then ushered in a motion of no confidence against the DA's mayor, that's one Dr. Mpho Phalatse, and a chain of events from that, which has led us to tonight's conversation, where, as I mentioned, the ANC ascending into the seat of power in the Joburg Council, with their mayor having been elected. And of course, with the assistance of coalition partners who broke away from that coalition in order to see that happen. So I thought to myself, hey, why not bring the very coalition parties on to the show so that you can get an opportunity to also pepper them with your questions. Maybe you're a Johannesburg resident and were maybe becoming a bit excited at the fact that there is no longer an ANC in the executive of your city. And now you wake up to the news of an ANC mayor once again. A lot of frustration has been expressing itself on social media and, of course, in the chattering classes, whether it be in the written letters to newspapers or people calling into radio stations. But beyond that, the social media waves have called, the social media spaces also have been dominated by the coalition partners themselves, as I put it this week, squabbling on air, much to the dissatisfaction of us, the voters, because, you know, you guys have questions, as I've been saying. So with that being said, let me not waffle away on this. Let me get straight into my guests for this evening who are waiting patiently in the waiting lobby. And even as I do that, please, let me buy myself a second to remind you, please, to smash that like button and, of course, share the stream. Let's grow this audience. I want my engagement to be more than 50% of likes. So I see the numbers are growing steadily, 300 people or so beginning to join this particular show. Hit that like button, please, folks, and let's get the engagement over 50%. With that being said, if you're watching this simulcast on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. We come to you every Sunday at 8 p.m. Tonight's topic, of course, what the hell went wrong in the city of Johannesburg? To help us answer that question is, of course, Thomas Walters from Alliance Cilliers on screen. Thomas, Baba, good evening.
Hi, Cilliers, thank you very much for the invite. I'm a big fan of the show. My apologies for the connection. I just went through load shedding. I actually have a candle here. Let me first start by saying that the fundamental problem in Johannesburg is that we're sitting with an ANC that is desperately trying to get its hand onto the levers of power, of the levers of patronage. They are utilizing it, of course, to get themselves back into government. We feel that it is an opportunity for them to frankly fund their election campaign through corruption. You will notice that the ANC has a serious financial problem since their access to tenders, their access to, call it, illegal funding has dried up. That is our theory. It's more than a theory. And our leader has warned. You will recall John Steenhuisen, our leader, actually a couple of weeks ago had a broadcast where he warned South Africa that the ANC is in the process of trying to recapture the metros in Gauteng in particular, for those reasons, that there's an onslaught coming. And what you are seeing here is an onslaught from the ANC. So much as there's some issues that we have to deal with our coalition partners, we all have to deal with, that is the fundamental problem. Secondly, there was a COPE speaker, well, not speaker now, but at the time a chair of chairs that went rogue, that the COPE could not, due to their own internal problems, kick out or terminate as a councillor and deal with the problem in that manner. There was and we'll get to that just now, but we believe that the PA actually fell for the patronage of the ANC. We believe that they broke with the coalition. We believe that they took a better deal from the ANC. In fact, they joined the coalition of corruption in this regard. We believe there is a problem with Action SA that we will get to just now, that we had to respond to in the media, where the progress that in fact was being made in our coalition discussions to deal with this particular matter got completely undermined by publicly accusing the DA of actually planning this. This is while we're trying to fight the ANC. So having said that, I want to conclude by saying that we are not, much as it appears that way maybe in the moment, our focus is entirely on saving Johannesburg, fighting that what is in effect an illegal coup by the ANC. We actually asking all parties to do whatever they can to join that fight, do whatever they can to make sure that all our noses are pointed in the same direction. The DA is actually focusing on the fight for the hearts and minds of the people of Johannesburg to fight the ANC. Thank you very much.
And sorry, as I struggle with the noise in the background, let me just remind you, dear viewers, I have a cricket literally by me, and it's going to be noisy. But thank you, Thomas, of course, for your opening remarks. I wasn't really inviting them quite yet. I just wanted to introduce everybody before that. But you took it off on a tangent there, but I did mark down some of those claims you made, and I will put it to all of the coalition partners here this evening. With that being said, let me just welcome everybody, please, first to the show. Chief of the other party that had that spat, if you will, with the DA online is, of course, Action SA. The chairperson of Action SA joining us this evening, Mike Baba. Good evening.
Good evening, Cilliers. Great to be here with you this evening. And despite how we've begun the debate already pointing fingers, let me be the one to say what a misfortune it is for the residents of Johannesburg, the tragedy that is the return of the ANC and the loss of confidence in coalition government when that is the future of our country. And as much as we need to talk a little bit tonight about how this happened, we also need to talk to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Absolutely. And we will unpack that, and I will give everybody ample opportunity, guys. This is not the mainstream media where I want sound bites. You'll have time to flesh out your thoughts, make your arguments, and the like, and including, of course, responding. Speaking about someone who will probably want to respond, as he's been named already, Charles Cilliers, of course, from the Patriotic Alliance, also joining us this evening. Baba, Charles, good evening.
Good evening. I hope I'm audible.
Perfectly well. Good evening. Welcome to the show. And of course, joining us this evening, last but definitely not least, is Ubaba Ngobese, Alco Ngobese, who of course is the General Secretary of the Inkatha Freedom Party in Gauteng, and of course is on the MMC in the city of Ekurhuleni. There he is on screen. Baba Ngobese Mkungebe Tenda. Good evening, Baba.
Good evening, Mehloka Zulu, and good evening to our colleagues, and nice to have you again, multi-party colleagues. Thank you.
Absolutely. Perhaps let's jump into it, and I think maybe Thomas therefore said quite nicely maybe where we will begin. Michael, I'll begin with you, and then I'll come to you, Charles, insofar as you've been named in some of the issues that have come to the fore here. And I said beforehand when we were planning the show that there's three broad sections which will structure tonight's conversation. Number one, what happened? What happened? There are residents of Johannesburg who are literally gnashing at the teeth at the moment at the prospect that the ANC is back in power. No one wants this, and I speak on their behalf because obviously they're not here to be able to say this directly to you. You know, the people coming to me and saying, no one wanted this, yet here we are. And yes, I must say this, fingers are being pointed at the PA, and I'll give them an opportunity to respond to this. But Michael, you guys have been literally tit for tat on social media. Your take, how do we get to this point, Michael?
Yeah, sure. And thank you. I think it's an important question. And as much as it's a frustrating question to have to deal with, I think we must realize in a future where coalition is a given, the South African voters need to have the question answered how this happened, because they are going to need to make decisions in the future about which political parties can conduct themselves appropriately in coalition and which one will do so in such a manner to destabilize our environment. And I think it's very clear. We've had two political parties that have left the coalition. I won't speak for those parties. One of them is here to speak for themselves. But Action SA has contended that there has been decision-making at various times by the Democratic Alliance that has created the environment for the destabilization of the coalition. I think if we're very honest with ourselves, the city of Johannesburg has gained a bit of a reputation for unstable coalition government, more so than service delivery and other things that should have been the core take-home for voters experiencing the benefits of coalition. And really, in our view, that comes down to an event of the last month following the departure of the former speaker, Vasco da Gama. At that point in time, Action SA informed all coalition partners that we thought it was necessary to install an IFP speaker, fundamentally because the historical events that had created this coalition had created a DA mayor, speaker, and chief whip. And that was because we had to elect those individuals before we had a coalition agreement. And because there was a breakdown in coalition talks, a whole bunch of parties got together and put the DA into office to avoid an ANC government. And while this could be revisited in the city of Tshwane, where a DA speaker resigned and the coalition installed a COPE speaker, in Johannesburg, the numbers were just so tenuous. And the reality with a secret ballot is a dangerous thing in an environment where financial inducements are used to bring people on board. So we had to live with that problem. But when the unexpected vacancy took place for the speaker position in Johannesburg, the perspective of Action SA and seemingly nearly all of the other political parties was, let's use this opportunity to right that wrong. And not because it's about taking things away or punishing anyone. That wasn't the agenda. In fact, I contend that the DA would have been the greatest beneficiaries of that change, as 3 DA mayors and 3 metros would have benefited from a guaranteed 5-year term of office, which really has got to be the name of the game. And the reason I say that, Cilliers, is because when you bring this down to a resident-centric conversation, which is what's been lacking so far, is change is a function of 2 things. It's about the quality of service delivery, and it's about the length of time in which that quality service delivery can be delivered. And what was really getting exciting in the city of Johannesburg and forms the basis of the tragedy for the residents is there were some really good things starting to happen across the board with different multi-party coalition partners delivering positive things. But you can only turn around decades of legacy of ANC government if you have enough time and enough stability to do so. And in my mind, the decision-making in the coalition deprived this multi-party government of exactly that factor.
Now, even as you say this, a part of me has a few questions here that are nested features of some of the points you're making. And guys, I did say this to the viewers, I will choose no side here. I'm not here to argue for one or the other. I will be brutal with all of the parties that are here tonight, and my apologies to them, but I'm saying it to their faces so that people don't think, that I'm here to make one party point or the other. Michael, even as you say this, John Steenhuisen issued a video where obviously he wanted on behalf of his party to explain the rationale for what happened, and of course, some of the key points he made here, you raised insofar as what he said, which is actually, according to John, a deal is a deal. And there is a signed coalition agreement which sets out at the beginning of this agreement, according to John, of course, who gets what in a sense, so as to avoid, presumably, these sort of conflicts. Now, there's 2 things, one of which I'm preempting you saying, things that I want you to grapple with. One, surely there's movement flexibility in this. It isn't fixed in stone. I want you to speak to that. And even if it isn't fixed in stone, surely, therefore, there must have been some form of dispute resolution mechanism that you all agreed to. Why wasn't that used, seemingly, and it now sort of plays out as a spat, seemingly to us, on social media? Can you grapple with those 2 areas before I come to Charles?
Yes, certainly. So Cilliers, the bottom line is that the coalition agreements aren't set in stone. They're obviously an agreement, and they need to be changed by consensus. I think that's an important point. You can't have some parties deciding something and everyone else has to go along with it. Like any agreement, it must be agreed by consensus to amend it. But I think the key thing is it's been amended before. We amended the coalition, for example, in February when the Patriotic Alliance came on board, and political parties like Action SA gave up positions that we were previously given to accommodate the Patriotic Alliance because the additional votes were very important to the stability of our coalitions. And while no one likes to give up a position, it was necessary and it was worth doing because those votes were important at the time. I think the coalition agreement is even subject to a regular review process. So the idea that it's set in stone or suggesting changes is somehow a breach of an agreement is just not a concept that's real. In fact, if you want to be very technical about the agreement, which I note there was a rather selective nature in dealing with it, the agreement says the IFP should have the position of impact chairperson, but that position didn't go to the IFP. So it's a bit dangerous when you start being selective in terms of how you deem the coalition agreement to be non-negotiable on certain things when it affects yourself, but when it affects others, you can be a little bit more relaxed in the nature of it. And to go one step further even, Cilliers, I note with interest 5.4 of our coalition agreement. I mean, if people are going to quote it, let's quote it. The parties agree that the selection of the positions mentioned above should be beneficial to the coalition with a view of an effective and cooperative coalition. Now, this is exactly what political parties were proposing. It wasn't a hostage situation. The irony is at the end of the day, when there wasn't consensus because one party, the Democratic Alliance, did not concede on this particular issue, a whole bunch of political parties, Action SA, the IFP included, went into council and voted with the coalition for the DA speaker. And that demonstrates a discipline to the coalition agreement. And I thought the leader of the Democratic Alliance flirted with being dishonest on that particular issue, because it didn't convey the truth of it, that we were engaging in good faith for stability. And when there wasn't consensus, we still voted the coalition line.
Well,
in terms of the
let
conflict
me
resolution,
come to you.
I'm sorry, I know that was a point you asked for as well. The coalition
Sure.
agreement does set in place different structures, and they vary in terms of their seniority. I think the difficulty on this particular issue is that this issue was dealt with largely nationally, because it's a national issue when you talk about the composition of these governments. And because of that, it almost became a body of first and last instance, where you didn't have the ability to have different structures trying to, break the stalemate. So I think that was one of the challenges. But, dispute mechanisms has become an important feature of coalition management. And I think the review process that we were undertaking on this agreement in Johannesburg and other places was going to look at that particular element because it was such an important one.
Absolutely. And even as I'm saying that, I must quickly apologize again to the viewers. If you've just joined us, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. We're in conversation, of course, with the coalition partners. Again, I must apologize for the cricket noise in the background. I will mute my mic when I'm not asking a question. Speaking about a question, let me come to you, Charles, because there's a lot of anger directed on social media and, of course, presumably in the public to the Patriotic Alliance, where people are asking the question, why? Why, if as an opposition party, one of the selling points you put to the public was the imperative to not have the ANC in government and a change, if you will, of guard. I'm putting this to you, of course, insofar as how the public posits this. Why would you then go back and allow the ANC, seemingly in a huff from your coalition partners, allow the ANC to come back into Johannesburg? How do you reason that? And as you reason that, how did this all go wrong in your assessment as the Patriotic Alliance?
All right, so first a correction. As the Patriotic Alliance, we've never said anything about working with any party, that we wouldn't work with any party. I think that's always been consistent. We have integrity on that front, that we've always said we'll work with anyone who's willing to work with us. And we understand that parties have different aims and ambitions, and we have no ambition as a party to get into opposition politics. We've gone into politics to make a difference and to get into coalition governments, and perhaps at some point to even rule outright. So our president, Gayton McKenzie, has been consistent that for him, politics is about having the power to make change. And we will work with anyone who's willing to implement our resolutions and our policies as a party and who will respect us in a coalition. So the fact that we have a national agreement with the ANC and we are working successfully with them throughout the country, and in very stable coalitions, I might add, is something that people should really not casually dismiss as irrelevant. So we have actually had a far better working relationship with the ANC. And the frustrations that I have experienced from coalitions, as much as there is disrespect, of course, from anyone in any coalition, but the frustrations that we felt working with the DA, I can tell you, have been far more profound. And considering that we are a party that doesn't have our roots in the white community, unlike the DA, for us, there's a sensitivity around respect. And even speaking for myself, I can't go back and just say, oh, well, we've been treated in the following way. We've been dismissed. We've been effectively threatened to almost be induced to vote a certain way through fear, which we would obviously never do. So what I can tell you is that we started this process of trying to renegotiate or just reopen the coalition agreement to a reconfiguration. We started it in good faith. We believed it was in the best interests of this coalition for the next 4 years, because if anybody doesn't understand that we have an agreement with the ANC nationally and that we are actually on reasonably good terms with the ANC at a national level, then they really don't understand what happened after the last elections. And for the PA, we say we'll work with anyone. We were actually very proud to be in this coalition. We were very proud of the Gauteng coalitions. And I think the partners here would be able to, if they'd be willing to to back me up that the PA was a very good coalition partner. We were part of all the constructive debates. We attended all the meetings, and we were very committed to making this work. But unfortunately, with what happened with the ANC and COPE doing what they did, and we lost the speaker in Johannesburg. I mean, the point is that we had a personal issue with the incumbent that was in there, Vasco da Gama. And so as a first point of departure, we didn't really want to see Vasco returned, even though we were willing to defend him, and we did defend him. And when I got the call from Michael from Action SA, and he made the suggestion that we should look at shoring the coalition by giving either the PA or the IFP the speaker vacancy, and then that would free up the potential to give the other party the chair of chairs, which was not going to go back to Colleen if we were able to sustain our numbers and keep power in Johannesburg. And everything rested on us being able to get past that first hurdle of giving that role to the IFP. And I was even suggesting that if the DA wants to hang on to a speaker position, with COPE's instability, there could be a vacancy for speaker in Tshwane. And I said that they would have the PA support to even go into the Tshwane coalition with very little expectation to allow the DA to retain another speaker position somewhere else. And then beyond that, we actually said, well, why should it just be the DA that feels pain in this reconfiguration? And we said we actually would like to swap a portfolio with Action SA, because we felt that that's a portfolio that we would feel more comfortable in. And what I then said to them is that if we can just agree on exploring these possibilities, and it doesn't have to be a particular configuration, but as the PA, we put a few configurations on the table to say, please consider these suggestions, because we believe this will be very good for the coalition. And I promised them that we would wear 15 wedding rings, 5 on our toes as well for the next 4 years. And I gave them my absolute word, the word of our president, the word of our entire NEC, that we would be guaranteed to be in this coalition. And what it is it was also a matter of managing the ANC, because they would come to us and say, you didn't really get a very good deal. You got half of what you were supposed to have with us if we had come into power. And there's a sensitivity there that you don't want to create this expectation with the ANC that you will bargain with them, and squeeze the last drop of blood out of them because they're desperate. But when it comes to negotiating with people like the DA, you have this mentality of, it's fine, just give me what you got, no problem. So it was about also being able to go back to the ANC and say, yeah, you've been on our case, and I promise you they were promising us the earth for months. This was not something new, and we were staying strong in this coalition. But it's about being able to also go back to the ANC and say, there is no entry point for you here. We're very happy. We have a deal that will keep us happy for the next 4 years. And there was that hope that the DA in particular would be able to appreciate the value of something like that on all sides. And of course, they had a right to dig in their heels and say, we've got a signed coalition agreement. But we also had an agreement with the ANC in Beaufort West and the Central Karoo and all the towns in the Central Karoo. And when Gayton went to them and said, I'd like to be the district mayor, and he gave them their reasons for that, they actually changed that entire government. They moved people around. They asked their own mayor to resign, and Gayton went in there. And there wasn't that arrogance from the ANC of saying, oh, well, this wasn't what we agreed at the beginning. And you're in any case off your rocker thinking we're going to make you a mayor. Who do you think you are? They said, no, let's work together. So we have this experience of being respected by the ANC and having that as a counterpoint to what really is just what some of the NEC members on my side call a baskop mentality that is perceived, whether it's there or not. I'm not here to debate those perceptions, because those things are perceptions, right? I'm not gonna fight for it, but I'm saying that perception matters in politics. And when we got a 7-page letter on the Sunday, which was just days before the Wednesday vote, on the Sunday from the DA, 7 pages saying that there have to be consequences for parties that don't keep to the coalition agreement. And there were references there to the Constitutional Court. There were references there to contract law. And as much as I had a one-on-one with DA leader John Steenhuisen about this, and he said that it was never about any kind of willingness to take anyone to court if we happen to go contrary to the agreement. I found it all very confusing, because then why even make those references in the first place when you know that you can't really take a coalition agreement to court? And the mood in the PA at that point was so bleak, and the disrespect, the fact that, like, what are we being threatened here, that they're going to take us to court if we actually still exercise our right to vote however we please, regardless of a coalition agreement. The coalition agreement is a statement of intent that we certainly did want to uphold. But to then also see the DA Gauteng chairperson, Cilliers Msimanga, pen an opinion piece at the 11th hour on the Tuesday night, calling coalition partners minnows, rent seekers. He said that what we were trying to do with reconfiguring this coalition and maybe switching a few positions around, that he said it was like children swapping collectibles at break. And I can tell you that from our side, reading that as the PA, we looked at this and said, what on earth are we doing even trying to save these people from themselves? And by the time we went to council the next morning, the line of march to our councillors was very clear, and it was, we will not support the DA candidate. And unfortunately, whether this is right or wrong, I do know I was with Michael at the time, and he came to me and he said, look, there seems to be a willingness now to compromise, that now at the 11th hour, we are going to give the speaker position to the IFP. And then whatever else needs to happen after that, we can make it happen. And I have never felt so despondent in my life, because that told me that the world was not going to end if the speaker position changed. We could have made it work. But the problem is that I had sent a message to Corné Mulder from the Freedom Front, who was the chairperson of all of our meetings, to say, I really would like you guys to understand the urgency of this before 8 p.m. because things are going to start moving after that point, and I really want to avoid that. And unfortunately, by then, we had spoken to the ANC and given them our word that we were done, and we were ready to start talking to them, and it just wasn't good enough for us anymore. And that's how we got to the stage that we're at now. And it wasn't right for us. We felt it wasn't ethical. That suddenly when you have a gun to someone's head at the 11th hour, and then they're in a panic and they say, it's fine, we'll give you everything you want now. We're not willing to take something from anyone that they weren't willing to give freely and with an open spirit in the first place, because that's just extortion. And we were not willing.
Just forgive me for cutting you short, and I'm apologizing for that.
I'm actually done.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to cut you short. I was going to let you continue, but there was a nested feature in what you said that I had to tease out, and I'm just keeping an eye on time. I did say the show is only 45 minutes. Can I just ask you guys to indulge me? Can we finish at 9 o'clock? Give it a full hour. Is that okay with everybody? If I can just have my thumbs up, so that I can give everybody a proper opportunity to flesh this out. Charles, there's a question that I'm seeing also pop up here. Some people saying, look, granted, the PA came into this, and you're right, by the way, by characterizing what Gates and McKenzie have been saying from the beginning. This, for us, if I paraphrase them, is about power, positions, and access to resources in order to serve your communities. I think that is an accurate paraphrasing of the approach that Gates and McKenzie had always argued he would use. The problem here for me, when it comes to the question of consistency, is it doesn't seem consistent, if that's what you're after, to then ditch the DA coalition where you had power, where you had position, on behalf of an IFP who, you're not from the IFP, whether the IFP made it into the speaker's chair or not was technically irrelevant to you as a coalition partner, because you already had the power and the position that you, insofar as what you look for in a coalition, wanted. So why then leave the coalition when the IFP making speak or not is irrelevant to what you guys want as the PA? How do you grapple with that question?
So I need to just correct that one. I think I mentioned it in passing, but just understand this. Let me take you back to what I said, which was that it was going to be either the PA or the IFP that was supposed to be nominated by the other parties, and Action SA was going to lobby for either of those because they wanted to see a larger role. We have 8 seats, IFP has 7 seats. Between us, we decide the fate of any coalition in the city. And I think that I have to take my hat off to Michael. I think, unfortunately, Action SA has had to bear the brunt of people kind of trying to blame them now for kicking the hornet's nest. And that this is now supposedly their fault because they made this proposal in the first place. And if they hadn't, maybe things would have gone differently. But I really think that that's missing the point quite enormously, because what Action SA noticed is that there's an imbalance and that this is not a very well-balanced coalition, and that your 2 larger, smaller parties, if we call us that, after Action SA and the DA, you're looking at IFP and PA as your 2 larger entities in this coalition, are sitting in an underrepresented fashion in this. And the reason for that is that PA came in quite late, and it was a very difficult discussion, and it took weeks of negotiations to even find a way to even get us in. And ultimately we conceded because we realized that we're just wasting everyone's time, and let's just get on with it. And I must say, when I came into this coalition, we were all happy. I think that we can't now turn around and say, oh well, we were miserable to come into it. We were happy. We were very happy to sign. But what happened with the IFP, and I think that I saw Thomas's hand going up when Michael was talking about this issue, the IFP declined their impact position. Now, there's a whole lot of reasons for that. And I think that has changed, right? It came down to personalities on either side, EFF, IFP, ANC. There were personalities involved. And I think that we've moved past that point. And I think the IFP was repeatedly saying, and people who were listening would have noticed that the IFP was saying, we would really like to get a chairperson position, something. And I think the IFP even reached out to us because we have 2 chairperson positions, and they even asked us, would you mind giving us one of them? Because we feel like having an MMC, but we were a little bit amused by that, because we were like, but guys, you're the ones that turned down your own nomination at the time. You had your reasons for it, but you kind of only have yourselves to blame for that one. But it doesn't take away the fact that they are underrepresented. They were underrepresented, and the PA could certainly have also been represented more, because if you think that Colleen Makubele was chair of chairs with 1 seat, and chair of chairs, enormous responsibility and power. So we were thinking we will go into chair of chairs because we're a bit more represented at the moment than the IFP, and let the IFP then go into speaker. And then you come out of this thing with a really rock solid coalition. And you cannot get there unless you
just on the time, Charles.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that, because I must bring the IFP in. You've brought them up, and I really want them to speak for themselves, because they're here. Babu Alco, I think you've heard the input from Michael and with Charles. And Baba, the name of your party has been cited quite a lot here. But there's 2 questions I want you to grapple with, Baba, insofar as your introductory comments in this discussion. Number 1, insofar as the notion of the IFP as speaker, where did that idea come from? Was that the IFP who initiated that? They wanted that, and perhaps on that basis then went to Action SA, went to EPA and said, guys, let's lobby on our behalf as the IFP for this? Or is this someone else's idea, which you then supported, by the way, which also there's nothing wrong with that. But I think a lot of people want to get a sense of where did that idea come from, number 1.
No, thank you. Thank you, Mehlokazulu, and good evening once again, colleagues. For the longest of time, the IFP has always ringing the bells of the IFP being underrepresented in the city of Johannesburg. PA has got 8 councillors. IFP has got 8 councillors in the city of Johannesburg. When this opportunity came, when the vote of no confidence against Vasco da Gama, we thought this was an opportunity, to try and balance the unbalances of the coalition. Because remember, like Mike was saying, Mr. Beaumont was saying, all of us, we DA was voted in. We did not expect that the EFF would vote for the DA and DA mayor, the speaker, and the chief whip. And it happened, and it happened before the coalition could be signed and anything like that. We thought that this was an opportunity now to try and balance, all the score, all the parties, to make sure that we are not only represented in the executive, but we are also represented in legislature, because we did not have any representation there. We only had one MMC of human settlement. But I thought, the DA will, come into its senses and say, okay, let us compromise here. Other parties have been compromising, and the issue of MPEC, that position belonged to the IFP. But because we wanted a stability, because we said wherever there is an IFP, there must be a service delivery, there must be a stability. We wanted this coalition to stay for the entire term, but unfortunately, it happened that the DA were not having none of it. But I must also emphasize, Mehloga Zulu, that the article by the provincial leader of the DA, Solim Simang, did not make things easy. It angered a lot of people when he started calling people names, and we did not appreciate it. I don't think it's fair to blame whether the PA or the Action SA, for all this mess that is happening in the Johannesburg, because we could have saved the situation if there was a political will. But unfortunately, the bigger brother syndrome kicked in. The DA was not willing to listen to anyone, and unfortunately, that's what happened. But despite all that, the IFP still voted with the DA. Despite all that, I was sitting with Mike and Charles, who are also part of this debate, in the public gallery when the voting took place. Our members voted, especially Action SA and IFP, we voted with the DA on this particular item. But unfortunately, the results turned against us. But so, here we are now. I don't think it's fair to blame anyone. I think the DA must go back to the drawing board and ask itself what went wrong, because we did everything possible. Even when one of our members voted against, in favor of the motion of no confidence against the speaker, we dismissed that guy. It took us 2 days to get rid of the guy, the councillor that did that against the party mandate. So from the IFP side, the commitment has always been there. Our partners here will tell you that we've always been committed. We don't speak from both sides of our mouths. We don't have forked tongues. What we say is what we do. And unfortunately, we are in the situation that we are in today. But I must think, we were not coerced. We always believed. The question was, were you coerced by other political? No, it's always been our stand that we are underrepresented in the City of Johannesburg. And when the opportune time came, and we thought this was a time to try and find a balance as far as the representation is concerned, I think.
And indeed, there's a few questions here. Thomas, a bit of a wry smile is coming across my face, because it must be said, one finger was pointing, to an extent to other groupings, insofar as how we saw this on social media in the tit for tat. 4 fingers are pointing back here. There's a few things I want you to grapple with, Thomas, to an extent. Let me begin at the top. It does seem like there's a question of an inability to compromise, Thomas. I do get the points that your party has put forward, especially by the party leader, John Steenhuisen, the notion of a, quote, deal is a deal. But here's Michael saying, well, hang on, we've had to compromise on certain positions when we had to accommodate the PA. Charles, pardon me, is also saying a similar tune. We were willing to take one position over another, for instance. And the IFP rightly pointing out, perhaps, that there was a conversation here around representativity as coalition partners. Thomas, be frank with us. Did the DA mess this up, perhaps by not being flexible on the one hand, but also I'm getting a second element here, which is tone of voice, or tone of approach rather. You know, there seems to be a very aggressive, or insofar as what I'm picking up here, an aggression towards the coalition partners, which simply wasn't appreciated.
Let me first start off by apologizing for misunderstanding you in the beginning of the meeting. There was a bit of a pause, and I thought you expected me to give my view on the question of this program. So it was actually not my intention to attack the other parties here. In fact, the substantive point that I made, if you want to go to a cause of this, it's the ANC's coup attempt that they're busy using, the attempt to hold on to power. It was that's the cause, you know, and that the situation with the COPE with internally in COPE with the COPE speaker was the crack in the wall that was being used. It was aggravated by the PA, and I'll get to that, the comments there. And I just wanted to say when I listened to Mike there, look, absolutely. This is about people-centric. This is about building service delivery, an alternative for South Africa, an alternative for Johannesburg. And I think we all share the deep, deep disappointment that a massive opportunity where there was great progress being made got lost primarily because of the ANC's behavior in this regard and the way of conducting politics. So what I was trying to do is to in a sense, prioritize in a prioritized way what we regard as the problems. Now, in terms of compromising, look, I just want to start off by saying exactly the problem that we are concerned about, where in a crisis situation where there's a vote on the entire floor busy taking place, that at that moment in time is seen as an opportunity to renegotiate with the inviting. You actually our point was confirmed with the invitation of people negotiating through the media, making statements about who they will accept as a speaker, who they want to have essentially people that are supposed to be negotiating at a table, negotiating in the media and inviting instability, inviting speculation. Now, what the DA did in the coalition agreement, there's provision made for a regular, systematic, and careful review of all the positions there. And the DA's position was that this is not the time to do that review. In fact, it was confirmed with the PA's response by trying to draw in discussions about different portfolios, where incidentally we did not want Action SA's portfolios to be renegotiated in the middle of this particular exercise. In itself, that discussion would have introduced instability, and we invoked that clause in the coalition agreement when it was very clear, and it was actually confirmed here in the conversation, that this was seen, initiated by Action SA, as an opportunity to renegotiate the coalition agreement right at the moment when we should have been focusing on the fight in council. We're incidentally deeply appreciative of the quick steps that the parties took to deal with the individuals that broke discipline, presumably the ANC got to. And now, Michael made the point earlier that, the coalition agreement was previously amended and the DA is therefore inconsistent. Coalitions work like this. There's checks and balances. There's various clauses that parties can invoke. The bringing on board of the PA previously, where incidentally the DA gave up positions too, and compromised in that regard, was done carefully, well considered. It was not done in a pressurized environment. And here's the key point. It wasn't done with positions that entailed an entire election on the floor of council with multiple parts where we needed to find unity. It was done with positions that essentially means that the mayor can just appoint. It's an MMC position. The mayor appoints the person. It's not an election. It's not a destabilizing environment. So we didn't invoke the clause at that time because it was consistent with the spirit of the agreement. But here's the fundamental point. If you are sitting with a motion of no confidence where we know there are rogue partners, rogue individuals rather within the partner organizations, it is inherently destabilizing and inherently contradictory to the spirit of that agreement and also the letter of that agreement to at that time choose the moment to renegotiate the entire coalition agreement. And certainly that was, you could have heard now from the PA's contribution, that was exactly where it went. Action has made particular proposals to parties. They initiated the renegotiation. I'm not saying at the time it was in bad faith. It then started becoming a renegotiation of all the positions there, which meant that the DA had to invoke that particular clause. However, it's consistent with the checks and balances of the party. I thought it was well thrashed out also in the negotiations. The DA did not just have a refuse approach. We actually, the candidate that the DA wanted to put up for that particular position, we changed the candidate because of the concerns raised by the other parties. It was not, in fact, what we did was took what all the parties were saying, and we literally, we took it to our National Management Committee, we took it to our federal executive, we thoroughly debated this, and we came to the conclusion that if we open up a renegotiation where the PA actually confirmed it in this conversation, where there are parties essentially making offers, counter offers, and you have the PA that is essentially, it was confirmed here, looking at where they can get the best deal. Then we open up the door of a coalition arrangement that is not better than the ANC. It's not simply about removing the ANC. It's also about creating a better alternative where the biggest threat is rent seeking. And I believe, look, Charles, and it's absolutely not a personal remark I'm making here. I thought Charles personally tried his best to ameliorate the situation. But of course, this is sugarcoating. Of course, it's sugarcoating of looking at what the ANC offers, looking at what the DA offers. There's a consistent pattern that we picked up from the PA also in the Western Cape, where we are accused and what we call the most outrageous things, but we're big, we understand that, to cover a simple exercise of looking what the ANC offers, looking what the DA offers. And here's the ultimate respect. Here's why it's not Big Brother. Here's why it's not arrogant, not all those things that we are being accused of. We respect the PA as a highly intelligent, very strategic, very, very intelligent, good negotiating organization. We don't believe you get triggered by comments of the DA and I want to remind you, Charles, in the beginning, in February, you said the same words, that the PA, once we put our word to something, once we agree to something, our support is guaranteed. And you made very, very good, very positive sounding remarks. I'm sorry, but right at the first moment where there was a tension, that fell away. So I, with respect, I think you sugarcoated in a very skillful way, essentially a rent-seeking exercise. Just in terms of the IFP, I can assure Alco, the remarks that he made, it was actually very carefully listened to and discussed. And I know there's interaction between our parties. The situation there is part of our concern. And this is not something that, say, we dismiss the IFP's input and the concerns that are being raised. You yourself pointed out earlier that what Michael referred to as the UDM, that the UDM is an impact and was given to the IFP, and that's in itself a rearrangement. That's also, Michael, with respect, selective with the truth. The IFP, due to a situation that they had with the EFF pressurizing them in KZN, actually asked the rest of the coalition to allow them not to take their position. And we respected that. We listened to that. We could have, if we were truly this uncompromising, would have said, no, we can't, you need to take it up. We can't support the UDM. It was actually because of the concern for their situation there that the DA at the time said, let's respect the IFP's position. Let's actually support them on that regard. And secondly, I think it's not allegation or an attack, but it's obviously a fact in that review of our coalition agreement, a factor that we need to consider that if the IFP is vulnerable to the EFF in KZN, and they pressurize the EFF in KZN, what we need to discuss and what we need to thrash out with you is, will it make the speaker position in Johannesburg vulnerable as well to the kind of coups, illegal coups that we've seen? So that is what we said at the time. It was not we refused. We actually compromised on the candidate. We actually committed to a full review at the appropriate time, not in the middle of a crisis where all this, exactly what is happening now, what we predicted was going to happen, will be invited into a coalition situation while we should be fighting the ANC, as Michael said, and I agree with him on that point. Now, this is so that's how it went down. It was not, look, there's also something to be said for when the DA doesn't immediately agree, that doesn't make us unreasonable or arrogant or all of those things. A bit convenient to accuse us of that. There's a far more rational response. We absolutely want to look at the review. We regard the agreement as something that inherently looks at an appropriate time at a review where these concerns need to be accommodated. We, of course, from the DA made huge compromises in MMC positions in order to have the speaker, the positions to accommodate the situation that Michael responded to at the end of last year. All those things need to be discussed in a rational environment without pressure, remembering that the enemy is in Luthuli House. And so that is where we're coming from. See, please, there was a lot of fingers pointed at the DA that I do think I should get the space to respond to. But can I say this? I actually thought in the negotiations up until Wednesday last week, and we were ignoring provocations, media conferences, characterizing the DA in a particular way, negotiating in the media, which is never helpful in a negotiation setting, as very constructive. We actually thought we had a compromise. Yes, we're not going to now change the coalition agreement, but we will review it, but we will do it in a future time. And let me also make it clear, we are focused on the ANC. We actually have more of a problem with the PA and their behavior. And we are not, how can I say, we're less concerned about Action SA as Mr. Mashaba seems to be concerned with the DA. I mean, there seems to be a deep, jilted lover type of animosity there. And I think this is problematic. It's problematic. I didn't interrupt you, Michael. But the key thing is, at that time, when we were sitting there on Wednesday, when we agreed there would be mutual communication going out from the coalition agreement, Michael and myself actually cooperated very well on that, as well as with the Freedom Front, ticket to the coalition agreement. In that time, Herman Mashaba decided to characterize the negotiations as the DA had a plan all along to collapse the coalition in Johannesburg, which is patently untrue. And unfortunately, the DA had to respond. And we also have to point out that this was much as it was actually under control and being dealt with, it's a substantive violation of the agreement to open renegotiations when there's a review being accommodated for. Unwise price situation.
So you have to forgive me.
That's why we're responding in the media.
Okay, and I'm with you. Thomas, in the sense that you've made that point 2 or 3 times now, and I really wanted to throw it to Michael because it warrants a response. Now, before anybody jumps in, guys, technically the time that I asked for has elapsed. Ordinarily, the show is 90 minutes. We usually go to 9:30, and that's where it ends. It really does end there. So I have to ask, because just to be polite to everybody, I ordinarily go to 9:30. Is everybody okay with that? But guys, it will end at 9:30, unfortunately. But now it's open, so you don't have to wait. It's an open discussion now. And with that being said, it's at this point of the show, dear viewer, that I often bring you in and your comments. So please, guys, get them comments and questions coming in. Pardon me. At this point, it is 9 p.m. As always on on Liberty and Friends, pardon me. In the last 30 minutes, your comments and questions to the panel will be flighted on the screen and will be read out. Please make sure you direct your question to someone so that we know exactly who you're asking. This is Liberty and Friends. Hit that like button, please, if you've just joined us. My like engagement is nowhere near where it should be, guys. Hit that like button whether you're watching the simulcast on Facebook, YouTube, or on Twitter. With that being said, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Michael, quite a few things said here, but I think the question I want you to answer, I think it's a good one. Michael, why now? There is a point that Thomas makes us to say this wasn't the time for reviewing positions when, for example, you were facing this onslaught from the ANC, and it just doesn't make sense to haggle for positions at this point. Now, as you answer that question, I'm going to put to Alco and Charles the following question, which is, the ANC is at its weakest right now. How is it possible that that party has basically seemingly dribbled all of you into the position, into bringing itself back into the seat of power in Johannesburg? So, Michael, that question, why now? Why do you feel it's so important to haggle on positions now?
Certainly, and thank you, Cilliers. I think there's two things that needs to be dealt with. That's a bit of a false narrative being created. Firstly, the ideas created by Thomas that this was, the position was vacated at 10 o'clock and we had to fill it at 11 o'clock. The position was vacated on the 31st of August and it was elected on the 28th of September. There was, nearly a month that went by in which that negotiation could have taken place. So it wasn't that urgent. It was plenty of time to negotiate. The entire coalition agreement from start to finish was concluded in less time than that. So the idea of discussing a single position certainly didn't need to take that long. And I think there's another important point to make. If you remember the history I mentioned to you earlier, Cilliers, that we could not revisit the speaker election in Johannesburg when we wanted to fix the imbalance at the top because the numbers were precarious. And because when you put a secret ballot on the table in Johannesburg, councillors get induced by the ANC and suddenly your majority disappears. That's why I couldn't wait. And the idea that we could then fill the position now and go to a review a few weeks later is false. And Thomas knows that, because the reason we couldn't traverse that position in the beginning still applied then, with the idea that our numbers were precarious and we could not revisit it in the environment of a secret ballot. It could only take place in those 28 days, as a matter of fact. I also want to suggest it wasn't secret. The first people I phoned about this idea was the Democratic Alliance, and proudly so. We weren't conniving behind closed doors, and we stood no benefit. Actually, SA wasn't going to score any positions from that. In fact, with the extended negotiations that the PA sought to swap a position with us, we sought to have to make accommodations. But that's okay, because our biggest issue at the time was that the coalition was unstable. All the time, the news coming out of Johannesburg wasn't how we were winning the fight against corruption or how services were being delivered in new ways to our residents. It was about how council meetings were falling apart, and it does damage to the confidence of the coalition project. But I also want to say one thing, because I can only imagine people listening to this debate must be tearing their hair out saying, why is it just about positions? And I understand completely, but I do want to offer this thought. When you're talking about positions at the top, the speaker, chief whip, and mayor, you're talking about the leadership of the government. It is very important that that is not just one party. And we have sought to fix that in Tshwane, where the numbers were more solid. The reality was it became one party in the city of Johannesburg because of the history. And it was important that we redress it, because successful coalitions are not built on one party that uses the support of everybody else to get a majority. Successful coalitions are when political parties share power and co-govern. And here's the important thing, Cilliers, in a very diverse country where the different constituencies that we all represent as political parties are being served in the decision-making of that government. And if you have leaders and you have participants, and the leaders are from one party and the participants are from the others, you create instability. And actually, his biggest concern was that we were going to become an unstable coalition government, a government more known for collapsed meetings than delivering services and winning the fight against corruption. And that is why we put forward that proposal. And that proposal, I remind you, did not serve to benefit us We sought no position. We sought 4 more years of government so that the excellent work that was being done by Mpho Phalatse and her MMCs could be extended over the 4-year term of office. And I want to say to Thomas, the enemy is not in Luthuli House anymore. They're in the mayor's office in the city of Johannesburg. And for me, that's the tragedy that we are having to come to terms with.
And maybe on that particular point, again, apologies for the cricket noise in the background. Charles, I must come to you, because a lot of the questions, a lot of the comments in the comment section, pardon me, which is a collection of the viewers on Twitter, Facebook, and on YouTube, is there's the trust element that seems to be lost with the Patriotic Alliance, where it's twofold. On the one hand, how is it possible that you even trust the ANC? I saw a comment here saying, by Chris Swanepoel, they've given us 30 years of rot to show us exactly who the enemy is. So on what basis exactly is the Patriotic Alliance, pardon me, trusting the ANC? And if you're going to trust them, how would a Joburg coalition, now with it seeing you hop to the ANC, trust you in maybe any other coalition agreement? Do you want to have a bash at that?
All right. So first of all, the idea that nobody supports the ANC, which seems to be, anybody reading these comments would think that the ANC is somehow in the political mix in South Africa by default. But unfortunately for everyone else here, the reason why the ANC is a factor in politics is because someone voted for them. So when you come into the city of Joburg, as they do, with the largest share of the vote, they have 91 seats, then you are a factor. And there's always the possibility that you might be able to find your way back into power. So I think we as the coalition, as it was originally constituted, agreed that it would be in the best interests of all of these parties that the ANC drops below 50% in 2024. And I think that's something that we could all agree on. And I was actually having meetings with leaders from Action SA, the DA, and Freedom Front, where we were just discussing this opportunity that has come our way. But you cannot escape the fact that the ANC does continue to enjoy significant support in this country. And to dismiss them as an enemy of the people it's a little obtuse, because there are a lot of people out there who still put their faith in the ANC. And the way we see coalitions is that it is not anymore about the party that won the vote outright. The ANC, when it goes into a coalition with parties and other partners, has to accede to the fact that things have to be done differently. And we have proven that, in particular, the Central Karoo, where the manner of government there and the approach to service delivery there is diametrically opposed to anything the ANC has ever done there before. And that is entirely down. And I mean, Gayton is very shy about this, and he always pays tribute to his coalition partners. So I certainly don't want to go against that notion, but something has changed in the governance in the Central Karoo that wasn't there before, and it's the presence of the PA. And that is a case study to say that you can actually bring positive change in a good coalition. And it's not about who's in the coalition per se, but is it a good coalition that's putting the residents and the needs of the residents first? And if you can achieve that with a partner like the ANC in the Central Karoo, I'm not saying we're going to achieve that in City of Johannesburg. And I saw another question there. I'm certainly not saying that I think it's going to be sunshine and roses, and we're not going to see seriously objectionable behavior. I have a lot of mixed feelings about how things are going to look going forward. But I think to just assume the worst and that it's just going to be doom and gloom, and that the city is going to turn into Mordor now over the next 4 years, is also, I think that's a form of alarmism that isn't taking into account what coalition politics can do and the good effect that coalition politics can even have on an actor like the ANC if you put enough pressure on them. And as much as we didn't want to give the DA an easy ride, we will not be giving the ANC a free ride. And I saw a question there from one of your viewers asking us, does this mean that we're now married to the ANC for the next 4 years, no matter what happens? Absolutely not. we will be going back if we really want stable coalition. If we can get a good government for the next 4 years with the ANC, then so be it. But if it means holding the ANC's feet to the fire yet again and causing all this chaos yet again, if that's what it comes to, then that's what it's going to be. And that's why I don't want to walk out of a meeting here with the likes of Thomas Walters and Michael Beaumont and Alderman Alco having made any permanent enemies here, because we don't believe that you should make permanent enemies, because this is politics.
Let me come in there. And I think you made some important points. Babo Alco, let me come to you because, again, I think a lot of people are incredibly disappointed because, and I don't know how to frame this, and I'm mindful of time, because in the last 15 minutes of our conversation, I want us to get to the question of, okay, we get it. Everybody has set out what they think went wrong. You guys have set out, maybe inadequately, and that's just a function of time, why, or there was an inability to sort this out in a formal structure so that it avoids, for example, the Patriotic Alliance saying it now has the grounds, or it feels it has the grounds to walk away and support the ANC in this particular instance. But the question, Baba, is where to from here? What happens now from a perspective Yako as the IFP, given the fact that there is the threat, and I'm not speaking for you here, Charles, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but there could very well be the threat that the Patriotic Alliance might say, well, if we did it in Joburg and it suits us because we're out for power and the ability to affect change for our constituents, why don't we do it in Ekurhuleni? Why don't we do it in anywhere else? But where to from now insofar as regaining the city of Johannesburg for the coalition?
Well, thank you once again, Cilliers. I think a lot of work needs to be done. We need to go back to the drawing board. We are still committed to the coalition. I mean, our partners here, they will know that knowing very well that the PA was gone, but we still voted, both the Action SA and the IFP still voted with the DA, knowing very well that we are going to lose. But we remain resolute that we are still part of this coalition. But one thing that we need to do, wherever there is a political will and the center is holding, I think that can still be fixed. But really, if we think that other parties have no role to play, it's only the big parties who have got more numbers. I think that's where the problem will always be there, you know, trying to mitigate the circumstances, especially in the city of Johannesburg. You know, the IFP is still committed. We are working with this coalition. You know, there's no change thus far. It's very, very unfortunate that our friends PA are no longer with us. But really, we cannot blame them. You know, the kind of things that were happening there, they were not very toxic for one to tolerate. But because of the agreement, the IFP is still there, is still voting with the coalition, and only time will tell what happens. But I will really plead with the DA, really, that each and every coalition partner comes, no matter how many members we have in that particular coalition. It's very, very important that we give each other respect, we give each other a space to operate. It's for the benefit of our residents, not only in Johannesburg, but in South Africa as a whole. So for me, those things are very, very important, because remember in Gauteng, the party, the IFP, gave us a blank check that we can work with anybody that we think is in a better position to deliver services to our community. Hence, we are working with this coalition. But my only plea is that let us treat each other with respect, give each other a space. And I think Michael Beaumont is correct to say a lot of compromises were made. In the City of Johannesburg, for instance, when the PA came in, the Action SA gave up the position for MMC for health and social development. and that position was given to the PA. I think that's a kind of respect that we need in our coalition so that it can last, so that we can concentrate more on service delivery and rather than concentrating in our own egos, which is not helping our voters at the end of the day.
No, I would agree with that sentiment indeed. And maybe, Thomas, as I throw it back to you, guys, just please be mindful of time. There's a couple of things I wanted to respond to, but also get to that last question of where to from here, insofar as regaining the city of Johannesburg. But Thomas, it must be said, brother, there's some pointed criticisms here around how you approach coalition partners, number one. For me, I think that really is the sticking point here. And number two, beyond the notion of compromise, which I think is a bit moot, because this is where I think I might throw something to Michael. There's something you've not articulated here, but I think what John articulated in the speech. It seems to be one of the arguments the DA makes is actually there should be a point where one draws the line. Insofar as if you agree to something, and fair enough, there should be room to maneuver here and there. But on substantive points, where does one draw the line? Because maybe Action is saying the IFP comes to you this time on the role of speaker, next time the role of deputy mayor. I know it doesn't exist, I'm just making the points. And maybe even next time mayor. Where does one, as a coalition partner like you, then draw the line, number one? And what imperative or what says you must agree to changes to is something which I'll pose to Michael. But with that being said, your tone on and your appreciation of coalition partners, maybe speak to that. And of course, the ultimate question, what do you guys do to regain Johannesburg? Tom, I think you're muted.
Okay, no, I also couldn't hear you. Let me start off by saying that what you have, in a sense, is now negotiation dynamics that are being discussed in a forum like that, which I think is actually very good. I think it helps to convey the complexity of it. I think it helps to that you understand the kind of positions that we have, and it's very unfortunate that when we were at that point where we are hearing these arguments, we were debating these things, we were busy finding a way forward. Also on the matter that you've raised just now, that particular tweet was made that this was the DA's plan all along. That is obviously, and that's there was a comment made about false narratives. Those are actually differences of opinion. That is patently untrue. And that is something the DA had to respond to. And I think this ended up in a sort of a to and fro, which is regrettable, but that's the background to it. The comment was made about weeks and weeks, and there was an opportunity to there was a month, and Action SA was quite open about it. No, there was quite I thought, very constructive engagements between myself and Michael at the time, where exactly these same arguments were being ventilated. And one of the reasons that we thought about this carefully, were willing to, in a proper review process, in an unpressured environment, look at that was exactly because we were listening to the kinds of valid points that were being made. But it's not true to say there was a month of negotiations that preceded it. There were bilaterals, talks, conversations in the background. The body that can sign off where the actual final negotiations took place, that started in the last week. So I think there is a bit of what was the comment earlier, selectiveness of the situation. The fact is it was irresponsible. The fact is that irresponsible initiation of renegotiations at that point was not being publicized, was something we were containing there until that tweet. But can I also say, back when the action, not action is the PA, big difference between the two. When the PA was brought on board, and Alco, the DA, also sacrificed a position. We also, so did the Freedom Front. The people made compromises. It's not true that people don't make compromises. At the time, the DA, at one stage, as one of the options we were looking at, we were saying, maybe we should look at speaker. It was one of many options. Please don't misinterpret this that we were willing to give speaker to the PA there, but it was a set of options that were being considered. This is in an unpressured situation where we could probably reflect in that kind of review conditions that I believe is appropriate, where it was actually the other parties and that made the argument, no, there's a vote on the floor, that's too dangerous. This is the irony of it all. So when we get to a situation where there's a motion of no confidence, where there's a clear onslaught and then reopen negotiations, I think the DA had a point in that to characterize us as uncompromising when we were willing to change the candidate they're not true. I think the PA, quite honestly, and it's absolutely nothing personal. I work well with the individuals in this forum, but the PA actually very honestly stated, we are for sale. They just signaled back at us, if they get a better deal, they will come back. I mean, that underlines actually the points that we were made. It's, I don't try to respond to it by saying, listen, Charles, we're willing to listen, and I appreciate your calmness in all of this, but unfortunately, I didn't interrupt you. That is very disrespectful. And then when it comes to Alco, look, I hear it's certainly something we can engage on. The IFP's concern has not been listened to, but I want to point out how the DA respects the dynamics of the IFP, in KZN, where we know what the situation is that you have with the EFF pressurizing you, the ANC, the deeply, deeply dangerous politics that is faced there. We, for example, deliberately chose not to insist on speaker positions like the IFP is saying here in Johannesburg, because we don't want to destabilize those particular relationships. So we're not being inconsistent. We are not being... What we're actually saying is, guys, let's do these things at the right time. Let's do it properly as anticipated in the original coalition agreements. And above all, let's not have rogue egos tweeting while negotiations are going on. Let's not negotiate through the media. Obviously, the DA will have to respond if there's a false narrative being set. But to get to the point of what's to be done now, I think we need to stop fighting. I'm afraid the PA is a different conversation there that we're going to be having. It's time to unify. The DA is driving, and this is where our real focus is. Hands off Johannesburg campaign. We must prevent a coup from taking place. Michael said something I agree with. And I will extend what he said. Albert Lutuli House is sitting in the mayor's office at the moment illegally. There's a coup taking place. And we should all be fighting that. The DA is throwing everything into it to save Johannesburg, save the residents there. And and we were welcome to take criticisms, deal with it in the negotiating setting. But I think certainly the IFP and the Action SA and the DA can agree on one thing. We cannot let patronage, the state capture, all of that come back to Johannesburg. And one thing we are saying, it's not just about anti-ANC. Maybe that accommodates the point that the PA made earlier. It's not just about removing the ANC. It's about removing patronage, the evils that the ANC created, and replace it with something better. It cannot be we cannot regard one another. That, in fact, is condescending and arrogant, as people that you can just deal out positions and, that in itself stabilizes it. There has to be values. There has to be a common purpose there. We are busy finding ourselves in that regard, and I look forward to that particular process afterwards. But I have to be honest, COPE is incapable at the moment of dealing with its internal issues. I think it's common cause. There is an issue with the PA and the way they're positioning themselves, confirmed in this meeting. There's a spat with Action SA. We need to talk about it. It's something that I don't think is a main focus of the DA, but it is a sideshow at the end of the day, and we need to move forward to the real fight. Albert Lutuli is in sitting in the mayor's office. And what you saw here, and I think it's good that the public saw this, is the intricacies of the different point of views. It's not people. It's a complex situation, and we're applying our minds to it. And I look forward to finding one another. Thanks.
with that being said, let me come to Michael, and let me quickly say this. I'll give everybody an opportunity once more to give final remarks, but that'll just be 45 seconds, guys. So please don't bolt just yet. Michael, 2 nested features and your view on what can be done. I think there is a lot to be said, Michael, about the spats between you and the DA on social media. I'll say it on behalf of viewers because I can see them chomping at the bit. Guys, no one wants to see this because there is a frustration with the ANC now being back in effectively the council. The same ANC which most of you here at least campaign to say you want to keep away from the cookie jar, so to speak. You began, Michael, by saying, it stands to reason. Actually, Thomas said it. It stands to reason that the ANC will be using this to fund, for example, its particular programs, whatever that may be. That is the City of Joburg's nest egg here. So maybe as we grapple with this, can we get a commitment, if you will, to no spats between you and the DA, and actually a real way forward for residents? And what does that way forward look like?
Sure. So, Cilliers, absolutely. And I mean, I think the bottom line is when you look at where South Africans are right now, and you look at their lived realities, you look at the challenges they face, and you look at the things that need to be fixed by their government, it is undoubtedly very frustrating to see 2 political parties that should find one another and that they are at each other's throats. However, the fact that they are at each other's throats is a more complex issue for which there's a lot of context. And let me acknowledge immediately, Action SA wants to spend more of its time talking about solutions and less of its time talking about other parties. But in many instances, we find ourselves with an attack being made against Action SA, where factually incorrect statements are being made. And I'm afraid, particularly in this particular matter, Cilliers, I'm going to have to say it is important that we address the subject of how this collapse took place, because future coalition governments are going to have to be formed by voters who decide which party should be rewarded with their votes on the basis of their behavior and which party should not. And it is a very important question how this coalition collapsed. And in our view, it needed to be ventilated. And then in the process, things get said which are just patently untrue. And there was a need to respond. But for what it's worth, Action SA would like to commit itself towards a process where we start putting the past behind and start talking about the way forward. From our perspective, particularly, we need to go through a process of review as a political party. We have been deeply invested in this coalition. We have worked very hard to make sure that it survived. We were, in fact, integral to making sure that it started by ensuring that a coalition candidate was put up and successfully elected at those inaugural meetings. And going forward, Action SA has to ask itself, how are we going to make coalitions work? And that requires us to introspect as a party. And I think that's an important word, introspect, because I note that even when question is put to the DA about the criticisms it faces, it responds talking about everyone else's deficiencies. It's kind of like it's not me, it's you kind of dynamic. And there's got to be an ability to introspect for every political party, and that includes Action SA. But at the same time, we also have to ask ourselves, how do we get other political parties in our coalition space to operate in a mature way? Because you asked the question earlier, where do you draw the line? Well, it's a consensus thing. In other words, any party can say no to a suggestion, and the DA did. And we still went and supported their candidate nonetheless, which proves that it's a consensus thing. But the reality in every coalition is decisions have consequences. And in my opinion, if there was an agreement to put forward an IFP speaker, it is my assessment that we would still have a coalition government in the city of Johannesburg today. And that decision had a consequence. And for me, it's very important that we understand these dynamics.
I just want to challenge that a little bit, because we're sitting with the Patriotic Alliance here, and I mean they'll be able to speak for themselves. How true is that though? When the Patriotic Alliance literally said, and Charles, I'll obviously let you chime in here, that it was either the IFP or them. So let's, for argument's sake, say sorry, I'm trapped on my own sentence construction. Let me take 2 steps back. It does seem as though the Patriotic Alliance of the other 3 parties here literally had their own pathway or decision-making process which would have seen them hop to the ANC or maybe stay with you guys, independent of whether the IFP was made speaker or not. And arguably, and this is where I want Charles to chime in at some stage, maybe it wouldn't have been this position, the speaker position. It could have been another position. Patriotic Alliance, would you have left on another position, for example, being contested, where you said, look, it's either this party or that party or us? And doesn't that lend itself to what the DA is saying, which is, where do you draw the line then, insofar as, the jostling for positions? Does that then become the defining hallmark of these coalitions? You guys jostling for positions, and if you don't get your way, one group leaves or stays? Mike first, and then Charles on that particular question.
I think the most important thing is that the PA must speak for itself. I don't want to appoint myself as their spokesperson, but I do know that in the course of the conversations that led to the fateful council meeting in question, the very clear impression we got as a coalition partner was that if this accommodation was made, that there would be an ability to get everybody behind the election of an IFP speaker, and we wouldn't face the tragedy we do of the lost government today. That was the understanding we had. In fact, I was in those meetings and I witnessed the leadership of various political parties making the case to the Democratic Alliance for precisely that, to say, make this accommodation. You've got mayors, you've got speakers, you have a lot of representation. See this as locking down the rest of your 5-year term and achieving stability. And I think that's where the importance comes to listen to your coalition partners. Because, when all of your partners are saying one thing, perhaps there's a need to listen and not just say, this is people trying to diminish us or weaken us. And especially when people are saying it who don't stand to gain anything from it, quite frankly.
Which brings me to you then, Charles. Where would the line be drawn? What would have stopped you guys from saying, well, if it isn't speaker now, whether the IFP or us get it, the next position or a position after that, where the DA then arguably views you, as strong arming the coalition agreement? Does that make you an unfaithful or untrustworthy coalition partner? I'm asking the question, guys. No one else is saying this, so please don't blame anybody else. Charles, I'm asking.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think that if you listen to what Thomas from the DA was saying, it's obvious that despite us having worked together for quite some time, there is a lack of understanding of the PA, particularly from the DA side. It's been one of my long frustrations that they just really don't get us. But it's really not our job to try to make other people understand us. They either get us or they don't. And they really don't. And even tonight, if someone can go back and replay and see where I said, if somebody comes with a better deal to us later, then we're just going to jump ship again. I don't think I said that. I think what I said was that it doesn't mean that the ANC must now take our support for granted for the next 4 years. And that was not to say, oh, well, come with a better deal and we'll jump ship. And I think the key point here is that we were not jostling for positions at any point prior to this tumult that overwhelmed us, with Vasco da Gama being voted out and serious questions being raised around the ability of this coalition to sustain itself in the face of numerous coalition partners being stabbed in the back by their own councillors. And not one councillor from the PA did that, just by the way. We were in support of this coalition. And I think the central, call it disingenuous sort of aspect of all of this is the question that we were being told that you have to vote for a DA candidate now, and you have to, or we'll take you to court, or whatever it was, whatever the rationale behind that was. And the question that I kept asking in those meetings we were having of the technical committee was, why not just do it now? The position is vacant. And if not now, when? And they were saying, no, we can do it later. We can do it later. We can do it later. And that just seemed incredibly convenient for only the DA, because then they've got their speaker back in there, and once again, they're in the pound seats. And one of the very last discussions that we had as a coalition before we went to the vote was an exchange between John Steenhuisen and Alderman Alco Ngobese, who's here now, where they agreed basically amongst themselves that as a fallback position for the IFP, they would accept chair of chairs. And we're sitting there as the PA going, oh, that was supposed to be the position we would take in the event that the IFP gets the speaker. And, you know, as much as you can say, oh, well, the PA is only going for positions, it was just a very convenient oversight to say, oh, well, sorry now, you know, we'll just give you guys chair of chairs. And they're basically agreeing that between themselves. And the whole renegotiation and realignment of the coalition was on the pretext that IFP takes something and we take something. And then here we are at the very end of, let's just give it to the IFP and forget about how we even started here. And among many, many insults, that also stuck in the throat.
Absolutely. And guys, we've completely run out of time. As I did promise, I'll give everybody an opportunity to have the final say in 45 seconds, guys, and I will be very, very strict on time. Thomas, actually, no. Let me begin with you, Baba. You know, final word, IFP's position on this matter, and how the folks can find you as a party on social media, if you're willing to share that information too.
Well, no, thank you, Mr. Gazul. I'm battling to hear you. I think it's your background, but I will try my best. Look, coalitions are here to stay. We must just make peace with that. But what is important is that we must always put our residents first before our own political parties and our own egos, if I may put it like that. The IFP said in Gauteng, as a provincial secretary, we said, where there is IFP, there must be stability, political stability, there must be service delivery, and people must be seen to be working for the people who put them in their positions. And the IFP wants to do just that, despite all the challenges that we face. And my plea will be that let us put the residents of Johannesburg, the residents of Ekurhuleni and Tshwane, and the residents of Gauteng as a whole first, because they are the ones who must benefit from this coalition. But if you don't do that, unfortunately, there's no use for people to vote for us as parties if we can't respect people who put us in those offices. Thank you, Mr. Ross.
Baba, absolutely. Thomas, final word, Baba?
Sorry, say again?
Your final word. Sorry, guys, you're struggling to hear me, but your final word.
Just a final word. Look, I think there is a bit of, call it characterization taking place that I can dispute here. I think, for example, the argument that we were insulting and trying to suggest our leader made a last-minute deal or that type of thing. There's a lot of things I can respond to, but I think the important thing is to say that at the end of the day, we have a particular job to be done now. There's a crisis. Johannesburg, it's not going to be just Johannesburg. The ANC is going to do their illegal coups, as our leader pointed out a couple of weeks ago in a broadcast. There is a process of local government illegal coups, mostly non-violent coups taking place. Yes, obviously the DA will be setting the narrative straight if there's silly things being said. But at the end of the day, that's the fight. We are focusing on the Albert Lutuli house that shouldn't just be sitting in the mayoral office, but shouldn't be sitting in, frankly, any municipality in South Africa, given what they're doing to the country. And yes, and we are, from the DA side, we have been absolutely, and if you look at beyond just this immediate setting, you would notice that the DA is absolutely focusing on the solutions that the country needs going forward. I'm sitting here in load shedding, what got on now. It's all crises that the country is facing that we are focusing on. We are very satisfied on the whole with the progress that the party is making. We do believe that despite disagreements, we can keep on engaging and we need to find one another. We have an open mind, not an empty mind. I don't think people should throw matches into a forest and then claim somebody else started the fire. I don't think people should hide behind a perceived sense of insult when they are very rational, very intelligent negotiators. But at the end of the day, those things to us those are sideshows. We know what the fight is. And here's a hand of cooperation. We are willing to cooperate. We have an open mind, not an empty mind. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, and thank you very much. Michael, final word from you?
Yeah, I'll stick to the allocation, Cilliers, just to say that I think there's an urgency in South Africa's situation. We are 2 years out from a national and provincial election, which is going to be definitive in South Africa's future. And the reality is coalitions are on trial. If coalitions succeed and people see parties are able to put their differences aside and work together for their benefit, the equations in 2024 are possible. But if they see what has really been a very public demonstration of how not to run a coalition continue, then people aren't going to come out in numbers, and the ANC will be returned in some configuration nationally and probably in many of the 9 provinces. So from our point of view, we are going to go away as an organization. We're going to do some introspection about the way we are in coalitions, but also how we need our partners to be with us. We typically like to involve the public. We were born in dialogue. That is how we were created, and we want to talk to the South African people because we think too much of this happens on their behalf without their input. And we're going to need to have a constant communication about the way forward, because there's still 2 more coalitions that we are all involved in Ekurhuleni, where the numbers are terribly precarious, and the city of Tshwane, where it's more stable, but there are also very serious issues there. So there's going to be a very short time period whether some of the things said in this room need to come true, or we will see more of what happened last week, and we shouldn't see that.
Absolutely, folks. A big thank you to you all, of course. You must forgive me, guys, for the terrible sound in the background. Charles, did I give you an opportunity to have a final say? I don't want to forget everybody yet.
Okay, no, I think I didn't, but I'll be brief. I think that hopefully the people in this room will learn a little more than I think I've seen expressed here. But particularly, I would have to say from the DA, where I think what we need in coalition politics going forward is a leader in a coalition that wants to lead in partnership with other parties and not with the support, especially not the unquestioned support of other parties, and also to think that they have a right to that support regardless of the situation and the context, and to act with great entitlement to that support. All of us have our own parties. We got to where we are through great sacrifice and very hard work, and we're not about to hand over the support that we have to just anyone unquestioningly at all times. So coalitions are the future, but I do think that we have to be better at them going forward. Thanks.
Absolutely. And perhaps on that note and that loud chirpy note, let me say thank you to all of my guests as I get them off the screen. A big thank you, of course, to Thomas Walters from the Democratic Alliance, Michael Beaumont, who's the national chairperson of Action SA, Ubaba Alco Ngobese, who of course is the Secretary General of Inkatha Freedom Party in Gauteng, and of course with Charles Cilliers from the Patriotic Alliance. Guys, I'm going to keep this end section very short because they're crickets, and boy oh boy, I'm about to pick up a can of doom and chase after his ass right now. But with that being said, thank you for watching. Do me a favor, please, as you end the stream, hit that like button, guys. Please, please, please do that as you may. And of course, in the descriptor of this video is how you can get in touch with us here at the Big Daddy Liberty Show by going to our website at www.bigdaddyliberty.com. All right, from me, Ngobese Ngebe Congo, I'll say the following. Have a great evening and never trust a commie.